You're not supposed to feel this alone. You're surrounded, digitally. Messages ping, notifications flash. You scroll past thousands of faces every day. And yet, you feel disconnected, not just from people, but from yourself. Carl Jung warned us about this decades before smartphones existed. He said that modern life would bury us, not in isolation, but in noise. And in that noise, we'd forget who we really are. We've never been more reachable, but we've never been harder to reach. Because connection isn't about access, it's about presence. And in a hyper-connected world, presence is rare. We spend our days reacting to texts, to feeds, to headlines, to dopamine hits. But underneath all that activity, a quiet ache grows. A whisper. I feel invisible. I feel misunderstood. I feel alone. Not because you're unloved, but because you're unknown. You see, loneliness today isn't the absence of people. It's the absence of being seen. And when your life becomes a performance, when your relationships are filtered, curated, and cropped to fit the screen, you lose something sacred. Authentic contact, the kind that holds eye contact, the kind that listens without needing to respond, the kind that says, "You can show me your real self, and I won't turn away." But in the digital world, we trade depth for reach. We connect more, but relate less. We scroll more, but feel less. We perform more, but belong less. Carl Jung called this a crisis of the self. When your identity becomes entangled in how others perceive you, you start to build a life for them, not for you. And the more you do that, the lonelier it gets. Because no matter how many people clap for your persona, you know the truth. They don't really know you. And maybe you don't know you either. That's the loneliness myth. We believe more followers, more messages, more engagement will make us feel connected. But Jung would say, we're chasing proximity, not intimacy. And that's the trap. We think we're connected, but we're fragmented. Pieces of us scattered across platforms, chasing connection in all the wrong places, avoiding the silence where truth lives. Because silence is where you meet yourself. And for many of us, that's the scariest connection of all. Loneliness isn't new, but today's version is different. It's no longer the solitude of the mountaintop. It's the isolation of the crowded street. You're surrounded by voices, profiles, opinions, yet starved for one thing: connection that penetrates. Carl Jung believed the modern psyche is torn, split between the persona we show the world and the self we bury beneath expectations. We are trained early to perform. Say what's polite, not what's real. Post what's likable, not what's true. Respond quickly, not deeply. And so we grow up online, but emotionally offline. We become fluent in reaction and strangers to reflection. Here's the paradox. We're more expressive than ever, but less known than ever. Because most of what we share isn't us. It's a projection, a performance, a version of the self optimized for attention, not intimacy. Jung warned that this kind of fragmentation leads to what he called neurosis, a spiritual illness caused by the repression of the true self. And modern loneliness? It's the symptom. You don't just feel lonely because you lack people. You feel lonely because you're constantly hiding your doubts, your fears, your unfiltered thoughts, your unpolished humanity. Because deep down, you've learned the world doesn't want the real you. It wants the edited one, and that belief isolates you, even in a room full of people. It's not just disconnection from others, it's disconnection from self. Carl Jung wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." Think about that. When was the last time you said something raw, and someone held it without trying to fix it? When was the last time you showed your unfiltered self and still felt worthy? That's the kind of connection we're missing, because in a hyper-connected world, everyone's available, but almost no one is present. You might get a reply in seconds, but presence isn't measured in speed. It's measured in depth, in how much of you is welcome in the space. And that's why, despite all the access, so many feel unseen, because your real self isn't getting the airtime. Your real voice isn't being heard. Your real needs aren't being met, not by others, not even by you. The myth is that more connection will heal this. But what Jung knew, and what many today forget, is that connection without authenticity only deepens the ache. So we stay busy, we scroll, we reply with emojis and presets and shortcuts, but we rarely pause long enough to ask, who am I beneath all of this? And who sees that version of me? There comes a moment, quiet, sobering, when you realize most of my connections are surface level. It doesn't hit like a loud crash. It creeps in slowly. During the conversations where no one really listens, the group chats that never go deeper than memes, the small talk that leaves you feeling smaller. And in that stillness, a new kind of loneliness appears. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being unknown. Carl Jung called this the tragedy of the modern self. So surrounded, so seen, yet utterly invisible. Because connection isn't just being noticed, it's being understood. And when the people around you only know your opinions, your humor, your highlight reel, but not your pain, your silence, your complexity, you start to wonder, does anyone actually know me? And if they did, would they still stay? That question sits at the root of our modern ache. And it's why so many of us run from stillness. We fill our time, we fill our feeds, we fill our minds with noise, because in the silence, we might have to face the part of us that's never been witnessed. And that part is scared. Scared that without constant connection, we'll disappear. Scared that our value lies in our relevance. Scared that without validation, we don't exist. But Carl Jung offered a different way. He didn't see loneliness as failure. He saw it as invitation, an invitation to return, not to the crowd, but to the core. Because here's the truth. You can't feel truly connected to anyone until you're connected to yourself, until you sit with your own discomfort, until you listen to your own thoughts without running, until you stop outsourcing your self-worth to how others respond. It's hard, but it's the only path out of fake connection and into real presence. And ironically, it's in those quiet, intentional moments, reading, walking, reflecting, breathing, where the loneliness starts to soften. Because for the first time, you're with yourself, not just around yourself. And that shift changes everything. You start craving authenticity over aesthetics, depth over distraction, soul over stimulus. You stop trying to keep up and start asking what's actually real. And in that space, you begin to notice something rare. The few people who truly see you, the few moments that truly nourish, the few interactions that leave you feeling more, not less. That's not loneliness, that's clarity. And from there, you can begin again, not by collecting more connections, but by building real ones. If this resonates, subscribe to Depthora and turn on notifications, because we're just getting started on this journey into real connection, self-reclamation, and inner alignment. Once you've seen through the illusion of connection, you can't unsee it. You recognize the emptiness in your scroll, the hollowness in your replies, the way your voice sounds when you're saying what's expected, not what's true. And something inside you says, I want more. More than likes, more than replies, more than digital proximity. You want resonance, the kind of connection that vibrates on a soul level, not just I hear you, but I feel you. Jung believed this was essential to individuation, not just becoming yourself, but being mirrored by others who reflect back the truth you've reclaimed. But that only happens when two people stop performing, when both drop the mask. when the conversation becomes a meeting of selves, not personas. And in today's world, that's rare, because we've been conditioned to confuse exposure with intimacy. Just because someone sees your content doesn't mean they see you. So we have to rebuild our definition of connection, slowly, deliberately, bravely. Connection isn't found in the algorithm. It's found in the pause before the reply, in the willingness to sit with someone's truth without fixing it, in the courage to say something raw, and the grace to hold space for what comes next. It's in asking, "How are you really?" and meaning it, not as a formality, but as a portal. Connection lives in the in-between, the silence between thoughts, the breath between sentences, the space between defense and openness. But here's the paradox Jung understood. To build connection with others, you first have to withstand disconnection. You have to stop reaching for the easy hit, the instant reply, the constant ping. You have to become okay with the silence, so your real voice has room to emerge. Because without solitude, you can't hear yourself clearly. And without self-contact, no other contact will ever feel enough. The world says, "Don't be alone." But Jung would say, "Be alone until you're no longer afraid of your own company." That's the turning point, when being with yourself is no longer punishment, but nourishment. When the empty room becomes a sanctuary, when silence becomes a mirror, and when you begin to realize, maybe the thing you were searching for in 1,000 faces was always inside. Not a crowd, not a text, not a screen, but a presence, your own. You've stopped running, the noise has faded, now it's just you, and whatever's been waiting in the silence. At first it's unsettling, no distractions, no validations, no external narrative telling you who to be. But stay, don't reach for your phone, don't fill the silence. This is the moment Jung was pointing toward, the space where you meet the unfiltered self, not the version people know, the version you've barely let yourself see, the part that's tired of performing, the part that's full of questions, the part that longs for something real. In this space, solitude stops being scary. It becomes sacred. Because here, you're not alone, you're undivided. No more negotiating who to be, no more adjusting yourself to fit. Just presence, just breath, just you. And in that stillness, something surprising happens. You feel full, not in the ego, not in the performance, but in your being. Carl Jung saw this as the foundation of real connection. You don't connect to escape your loneliness. You connect to share your fullness. Because when you've made peace with who you are, you're no longer entering relationships to be completed. You're entering to be mirrored. And those are the connections that heal, where silence is allowed, where truth is safe, where your essence, not your performance, is what resonates. Most people never get there. They stay trapped in what Jung called persona relationships, two masks talking to each other, while the real selves sit silent beneath the surface. But if you do the work, if you sit with the ache, listen to the voice beneath the scroll, and remember how to just be, you start attracting something rare. People who've done the same, people who don't need you to impress them, people who meet you where you are, not where you pretend to be, people who understand that presence is more powerful than performance. That's when loneliness starts to dissolve, not because the world changed, but because you did. You stopped outsourcing connection. You became the connection to self, to truth, to now. And from that space, you begin to offer something deeper to the world. Presence that can't be faked. Compassion that isn't performative. Attention that actually lands. You stop needing the crowd and start building a tribe, not many, but real. You started this journey feeling surrounded, but empty, visible, but unseen, connected, but lonely. And now you understand why. Because connection without authenticity is just noise. Because visibility without vulnerability is just performance. Because most of what passes for closeness today is nothing but proximity. Carl Jung knew this ache long before the internet ever existed. He saw how modern life trades meaning for momentum, truth for trend, depth for speed. And he warned us, if you don't consciously return to yourself, you will live someone else's life. You will wear someone else's face. You will chase someone else's version of love, until you forget the shape of your own soul. But now, you know better. You've seen behind the illusion, and more importantly, you've remembered something sacred. Real connection begins where the performance ends, not with more followers, not with more replies, not even with more attention, but with presence, with silence, with honesty. It begins when you turn off the feed and turn toward yourself, when you say, "This is where I am, this is who I am, and even if no one sees it, I will." That's not loneliness, that's liberation. Because once you're no longer afraid of your own company, you stop tolerating shallow connections. You stop shrinking to fit spaces that don't hold your truth. You stop proving and start being. And the irony, that's when the loneliness starts to fade. Not because you found more people, but because you found yourself. And when you show up as that self, authentic and unfiltered, you become a signal. You attract what you are. You invite others to drop their masks. You hold space for the kind of intimacy most people are too afraid to seek. That's the revolution Jung spoke of. Not rebellion against others, but a quiet revolt against the part of you that thought you had to perform to be loved. You don't. You never did. You are already worthy of being seen, already whole, already home. So, now that you know that, here's the final question. What would your life look like if you stopped hiding and simply allowed yourself to be known? You don't need the whole world to see you. Just a few souls who recognize the quiet, sacred weight of someone who has come home to themselves.